We're talking here mainly about doing things on paper, and it's a great way of working things out and working out the plotting things and who fits where and everything. But obviously this is a digital skill, so we wanted just to give you some ideas of what sort of softwares you could use to either to represent your team like this or to kind of aid communication. So some of these, or hopefully most of these, you'll be aware of. So Microsoft Visio is a good option for like building plans of things, spider diagrams and how things interrelate to each other. Adobe Illustrator is another really good option for building visual representations of things. And then Prezi is another different option. But for those of you who don't know, Prezi is a presentation software, but it moves, so it kind of floats in and out. And this is an example here of how you might use it to demonstrate your team. It's thinking. Oh. So you can just maybe talk about the research team, about the project, what it's about, then go into each member of the team, who they are, what their specialism is. I'm going to go through this at super speed because we don't need to see all the detail. And then you can talk about the research, what you aim to do, what the goals are. It could be anything you want to talk about. How are you going to do that? The research plan, where you're getting the research from, different snippets from your research if you wanted to. But basically, that's just an example of how you can use a different sort of software to show how things interrelate, how people interrelate, how different elements of the research fit together. Prezi is really easy to use. There's a lot of different templates. So this will just be a notice board template that they've used that will come with all the different Polaroid templates, all the little pins. It's all there ready for you to do. You literally just input your information in. So it's worth checking out. It's also really good to use for presentations. You just have to be careful because if people are travel sick, it will make you feel travel sick. So you have to really reduce the amount of swooshing that you do, basically. And then these are just some examples from a couple of different projects about how you might visually represent the team. So it might be a little bit small for you to see, but how you might visually represent the different disciplines that take part in research or in the team. So in this one, we've got design, social science, engineering, and you're just able to see kind of maybe who got the funding in, where the management sits within those disciplines, who does the actual research, and you could expand this and use it to identify individuals within those disciplines as well and how they overlap, how they interact with each other. And then another one here of user-centered design, data analysis and engineering, and where the responsibilities lie within each of those areas. So one of these is from one of my projects and another's from another similar project. But actually we found when setting up the research teams, it was really handy to actually be able to go, these are your areas of work, you stick to that, this is what I do, and this is how we'll communicate on that. And actually when you're discussing between disciplines, especially between maybe a more scientific or engineering based discipline and then maybe a more design or art discipline, you need those kind of visual methods of communication because we have really different methods of communication in general academic language, so it's really handy to just see that visualization. So going on from that, we're then going to talk about communicating within your research team, and Vicky's just going to come and lead a bit of discussion.
Hi everyone, I'm Vicky Shipp. I'm a research fellow at the University of Nottingham in Horizon Digital Economy Research. I research in the field of human-computer interaction, particularly in user-centered design, so kind of how we learn from people to design things. I happen to study collaboration in software development teams for my doctorate, so I've got a bit of experience in kind of the problems that can happen in collaboration. But one of the reasons we're here talking today is because from our experience as researchers, we want to share with you some of the things we've learned about how we can use digital tools to support sort of how we communicate with our teams. But obviously we've got a room full of people here who could also have their own experiences, and you've just been discussing these. So we kind of wanted to have a bit of a discussion on why you think communication with your team is important, the sort of problems you've had and any of the tools that you've used. We'll then also talk about the tools that we've been using to help with this communication. You've already seen, we've talked a bit about it already. So things that might be important for communication for me, in particularly in my project teams, I work in an interdisciplinary research hub. So there's psychologists, computer scientists, economists, mathematicians, and we're all working together on projects. And it's really important that we communicate all the time, particularly to understand what is research for each other. I mean, what's the kind of research output for a computer scientist on a project, whereas versus like the research output for a mathematician on the project, and kind of or for psychologists. So it's about communicating to understand, you know, how is my work going to fit in with someone else's work. But you've also got to communicate, perhaps if you're doing quite individual work, you still might be working in a shared space using shared resources, so it's really important to communicate with the rest of your team. So does anyone sort of have any kind of particular things they think are important, or any particular problems that they want to share with the room? You might have just had an interesting discussion after mapping out your team. Has anyone got anything? Or any tools that you've used to aid communication that you've learned from or failed miserably at?
I guess one of the big issues I've had recently is we're starting a big international project with, need I say, some Italians.
All right, yeah.
And the communication issues that brings about, not just because of language difficulties, but because of just different approaches to life.
Right, okay, yes.
So we'll sort of say, you know, we'll meet at this time, and sort of 20 minutes later you're still waiting and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's just kind of factoring in a way that you can try and get around that and not get irritated by it and let it kind of get in the way of what you're actually trying to achieve.
Yeah.
What have maybe been the best communications you've had as a group?
When I went to Italy.
No, but I think that's one thing to, you know, we get frustrated because you're trying to communicate by email and you're getting very short responses, or you're getting too many emails from a team member, or sometimes looking at what's been the most effective communication you've had as a team, and then thinking about what were the conditions around that you can replicate. Or so maybe you can't go to Italy all the time, but if the barrier is, you know, you send an email and you get a reply 3 days later, and you're used to getting replies 3 hours later, then start going to virtual meetings.
Yeah, I mean, that's
like,
kind of what we do.
think about rather than thinking about what have been the bad communications, think about what have been the best communications.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point to learn from that. Yeah, I think there's definitely kind of lots of different cultural differences and different ways that people approach meetings. I remember studying teams where there was a particular culture who would never pick out the positive things and always were quite negative, but that was just the way they were. But people had to learn to kind of work together or realise that was just a difference, and you kind of learn that over time. But yeah.
In terms of some digital tools for working internationally or cross-culturally, I mean, one simple one is there is a website that helps you schedule international meetings. And basically you go in and say, we have collaborators in these time zones, and it shoots out a list of these are the most likely convenient times across your time zones. So you're not proposing to someone a meeting at 4 a.m. in their time, and you're also not having to do that math. That's when, being Canadian, still working with a lot of Canadian researchers, I go there regularly, and it goes, you know, these 2 hours are when both of you are likely in your workday. Simple but helpful. Another one that I've had working, I have very poor hearing, and I also work with a lot of people who are visually impaired or hearing impaired. So one thing we do is, even if we're having a phone call, we do it by Skype because it helps lip reading. It also has a messaging, so you can instant message at the same time. That's very helpful if you're working with someone who has an accent, working in their second language, your second language, to just be able to go, what was the name again? And you can type it out at the same time that you're talking to them. Yeah. So that's, like I said, I use it more for hearing and visual impairments, but it's also helpful working across languages.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the tools that I found really interesting is when with communication is often you're in learning about different domains that you don't necessarily understand, and you're trying to take notes of all these quite unfamiliar things, and I can never keep up. So I got one of those pens that records audio, so you can take it to meetings and you can be writing notes, but it also records all the audio from the meeting so that you can come back and you can, in your own time, listen back to what you wrote, but also what was said at the same time as you're writing that. And that's a really interesting tool if you're working in in meetings where you need to remember what was said, but you might not be able to get it all down at the time. So yeah. Does anyone? Oh.
Another good one like that is Evernote.
Yeah.
You can record, you know, the audio, etc. And on the screen you can type your notes and even make reference to particular time frames within the recording.
Yeah.
Which is quite good for referring back.
Yeah. Does anyone else have anything?
No, I would second Evernote.
All right, yeah.
This is probably one of the best information gathering tool, and it's kind of evolving on it. Every few months they have got a new feature.
Yeah.
And whether it's information in an audio format, video format, or web, which are common, it's pretty good to integrate them into the system.
Do other members of your research team use it?
Well, I've been using that as my lab book, and
All right, yeah.
made my supervisor to look into it.
Yeah.
So I kind of forced him, and he does that. He's quite happy.
All right.
You can actually set up groups within Evernote so that you can share the documents and resources that you've created as well. So you just like inviting other people in.
Cool.
It's quite useful.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges when using tools in groups can be trying to get everyone to use it, but then there are some that you can just use yourself, like the pen, like Evernote. You can use it on your own, and it's still a really effective way to help you work within the team. And then you can sometimes share your learning from that and try and see if other people would like to use it.
Are there any ethical considerations of you recording in a meeting?
Yes, I had to be very careful that I asked for permission from everyone. I'd always tell people that I was using the pen, and unchecked that that it was okay with everyone, and if it wasn't, I stopped using it. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Just a point to make sure that people are aware of that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure people are meeting things recorded unless they're around.
Yeah. Well, I was working in a company where it was, didn't want to obviously risk sharing some of their data with externals, so that was the challenge there. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can also get apps for your tablets and things that do a similar thing to the pen, and you can use Evernote and things like that. Anyone else have anything they want to share from their own experiences, things they found have worked really well for them?
Well, I mean, the thing that I found working on a range of different projects is getting the right kind of communication for what needs to be talked about. So it's a frustrating thing if you have a team meeting scheduled, but you don't really have enough stuff to fit it, and then it just feels like you're having it because it's 3 months and you're just filling everybody's kind of time
Yeah.
out that day, and you have to produce something for it. And other times you have kind of the opposite, where you can really need to see somebody face to face to actually discuss something and
Yeah.
to sort of organise on the project the type of type of thing that needs to be communicated in the way that it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah, did you find any tools that were particularly useful to help you with that?
Not so much. I mean, more kind of experience in getting used to how my PI works and how to knowing when it's best to write a response to an email or to just pick up the phone and
Yeah.
or,
Yeah, sometimes it's the simple tools. Just a phone call can be what you really need, yeah. Yeah. Did you want to carry on? Was there anything else that people... Oh, yeah?
I think another big issue is version control that we
Yeah.
already talked about.
Yeah.
Because we can, well, in our team we use the research drive to put some, the latest version of a document
Yeah.
will usually be on the research drive. But then not everyone works on that version. Most of the teams works on it,
Yeah.
not everyone, and then it gets really confusing. So I don't know if there's anything out there that's useful and not everyone would.
Yeah, I found, I do use, with writing things, like use Dropbox, and sometimes it's the sort of the social mechanisms around the tool. So Dropbox does do kind of version control, but it's so easy to accidentally click on a file that someone's working on, work on it and save 2 different copies, and then you get, oh, there's a conflicted copy. And I found the best thing that I did on one of my projects was where someone, as soon as they started working on a new thing, they'd create their own copy, put their name on it, put the time on it that they were working on it, and then you'd know that they were working on it, so you don't work on it, or you can create a separate copy. And yeah, it's kind of coming up with things around that to help you with the version control, because it can be really difficult thing to manage. Has anyone else had any kind of things they've done, any issues similar to that they've used? Kind of. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. But no, I think that's one of academics' most common things is the version control on paper writing, and it's the kind of bread and butter of what we do, but yeah.
Well, Google Docs has been more useful on this, coordinating these sessions than Dropbox, because Google Docs keeps one document. You can see, you know, if Becky and I enter at the same time, I can actually see her typing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the problem, I think, that many of us encounter is it's not a very secure platform. It's not a very, so it's fine if you're talking about amending an agenda or something of that nature, but it's not really fine if you're talking about actually, you know, working with a data file or something.
No,
like that.
so I can't put any data or anything like that.
So
yeah.
it's not bad for sort of collaborating meeting schedules or abstracts or things like that. It's very useful, but it's, I think you're right that version control is still one of the largest. There hasn't been a great answer.
No, there isn't. I do, yeah, Google Docs is great for that, but yeah, it's so much of your stuff you can't put on the cloud that you can't take advantage of these things that have been developed. So.
And one thing that we did in our research project, which is a little bit out there and a little bit, it's not out there, but like is an interesting thing to do within research projects, is we all did Mallaband profiles. So it's kind of a psychological profile of the way you work. So as a team, we all did that. That's including PIs, co-Is, RAs, PhD students. And what we wanted to do was work out where the strengths were within the team. So you can see the green is where people's primary strength is. So you can see we're very strong as plants. That's an idea person. Apparently we've only got one strong team worker, so that may be where some of our issues lie. And then purple, that's your secondary strength. So completer finishers, that's great. Obviously paper writing, we're going to get to papers finished, people implementing ideas, actually doing things. So yeah, and then interestingly, orange is where you struggle the most. So where in our team are we weakest? And what we found out, it was quite a good way of initially when we first set up the team of going, well, where's our strengths? Right, let's play to those. But actually, where in our team are we lacking people, and do we need to do something about that? So actually, we've got no one that coordinates within our team. Another big issue. So actually, what do we do about that? Do we pinpoint that on one member of the team and go, right, that's your job, you need to try really hard to focus on that? Or do we, when we look at getting more members of the team or different PhD students, do we actually look for people with those skill sets? So it's quite a simple idea, but I don't actually know of any other research teams that have done this up front, but just to really get an idea. And what's really handy about it is it does help further down the line when you're thinking, okay, that person's really annoyed me, but I know that's not their strength. So like, it does give you a little bit more understanding of where people's strengths lie, where their weaknesses lie, and perhaps a little more grace for them maybe. So that's just an idea, if you are working within teams, of an idea of getting to know people a little bit better and getting to know how your team structure works. So we're just going to cover some of the digital tools, mainly ones we've just talked about. So one thing that we've used and not successfully, I will be upfront, is a team blog. So we have, our research project has a website, and on that we had a private team blog that only we could see. So the idea was that we would record our research process, any questions, any big decisions. There would be blogs about it. We'd talk about, you know, from up front it was talking about the logo design and that sort of thing, and then further on which technology we wanted to use. The the idea was that we'd have this central space that we could discuss, ideas would come out of it, it would all be recorded, so that then when we wanted to report the project, it would all be written down there perfectly and we could just transfer it. Unfortunately, I'm the only one that ever wrote on it, so it's a great record of my musings, but yeah, it didn't work. But that is one idea. If that works in your team, if you've got people that are really engaged and want to write about what you're doing, then great. That's a good option. I've never actually heard of it being done successfully. You've tried as well, haven't you, Andrea?
I've tried the same thing where a team research blog is a way of communicating, and people kept reverting to email.
Yeah.
So the blog ends up looking dead, and it actually kind of sucks momentum because it makes it look like nothing's happening. So, and this part that's worried me the most about that is our project was actually about blogging. So the people I was working with was, we were all bloggers and we all had blogs of our own that we were quite active on, and yet this research blog was dead in the water. So I've really gone away from it because, like Becky, it seems like a good idea in that a blog is a very simple bit of software. It's a template. It's easy to update. You can give multiple people control of it. You can add documents. You can add photos. You can add text. You can add calendars. It should be perfect, and yet I haven't seen that many research blogs. What I have seen is teams who use blogs as a way of communicating research findings to a public audience, and I'll talk a bit later about how I use blogs to collect data. But as a terms of a coordinating tool, I would love to hear some examples of teams that have successfully used blogs, but I'm afraid I haven't found any.
Cool. So that's one option. Google Docs, as we've just been talking about, various different cloud storage, of which Dropbox is one, and then different visualization techniques. So for anyone that doesn't know, this is what Google Docs looks like. This is just our agenda that we're working on. So you can type it, it's a normal document, and as you can see, whilst I was on here, so was Andrea. So I can see that she's online as well. I don't think her cursor's on here, but if Andrea started to type in this box, it would come up in pink with Andrea's, you'd see the words come up. So it is a great tool in terms of paper writing, in terms of collaborating, and there's also a chat section on here as well. So you can ask questions of each other while you're on the document. This is what Dropbox looks like. You can have various different folders, you can have work stuff, home stuff, easy to share with people, just gives you that extra bit of storage, that extra bit of, so we've been, what I don't understand is why some people use Google Docs and some people use Dropbox. That annoys me because I have to use both for work. But so some of our partners we're using Dropbox with, some we're using Google Drive with and sharing the links. But either work well. My preference is Google Drive, but it's a great facility to use. And then this is a little bit different, but this is just about communicating kind of process-wise with the team. So as I was saying before, that we have different disciplines within our projects, and it's actually really hard sometimes to communicate between each other, to know what each person's doing. So the tact that we've taken is to kind of do really detailed plans of what's going to happen. So like down to the point of like, so Loughborough University sends the householder details to SMS, which is a company. We then have to say, so for that to happen, what needs to happen within Loughborough University? What questions do we need to answer in order for that to happen? So it sounds like a little bit overkill that we really detail all of the stages, all of the actions that need to take place, and all of the questions that need to be answered in order for the actions to take place. But actually, when working within a team, that's really handy because you can highlight who needs to do which particular actions, who needs to answer which particular questions, and everyone can see what stage we're at, how we're going to get there, and it just kind of makes it all a little bit more capable, I guess, within that team. So, and also the time scale, you know, where you should be when and what's happening. And likewise, this is just a really simple diagram talking about cohorts of houses, which technology will go in which house, using little houses, numbers. It's just kind of thinking of simple ways to communicate the information amongst the team so that we don't have to just read long emails or read words and work out what someone's saying or have long phone calls. It just makes the whole process a lot easier. This is how to communicate literature review with possibly different disciplines. But maybe if you're writing a paper or doing literature reviews with people from different disciplines, how do you know what someone's covered or what areas you're going to go into or how those things link together? So doing this sort of visual representation of it shows the different areas of literature that have been covered, how that links into maybe a secondary area, and then obviously this is a much bigger diagram, but where that might lead to in the future. So it's also, you could then mark on here who's going to cover what questions or research questions that has led to, and it's just kind of, as I've said before, a nice way of visualising information so it doesn't take reams and reams of email.